Thank you very much, Henrik, and again, a very warm welcome to our panelists. I'm sure you're all going to contribute to this really important subject. And the subject, of course, as Henrik has said, is customer centricity, future-proofing the ultra-normal. But actually, there is some context that I'd like to just share with you before we get onto this discussion. This subject came up as a result of some work that CIONET did last year to look at the whole subject of innovation, which Google will speak about. What we discovered, and it was really quite a depressing discovery, was the fact that in most Western economies, the big players are not growing. Their equity values have been pretty much flat in the last 20 years. Productivity has flatlined, certainly in the UK and I'm sure elsewhere. We seem to be doing something wrong here. Why are we not growing? Now, in the COVID period, the spotlight has been even more intense by comparing performance of the big established incumbents with the digital leaders. And last month, the UK was humiliated by the fact that Apple was worth more in equity terms than the whole of the FTSE 100. But don't hold your breath. The 5 digital leaders in the US, the FANGs, are actually worth more today than the whole of the European equity market, including the UK and Switzerland as well. So I guess the question we all have to ask ourselves is, could we not do a little better? So we went into an inquiry last year that led us to the view that most large corporates are essentially focused on what we would call operational excellence. They want to continue to streamline, cut costs, improve efficiency, and they've done a pretty good job of that. But that hasn't led to growth. It hasn't led to equity value growth. And so I think the real question this year that we have addressed has been, how do we actually accelerate our growth within the established incumbent community? We don't necessarily want to replicate the digital leaders. They can go off and do what they want to do, but clearly we have to do a catch-up job rather quickly. And again, if we look closely at what has been the preoccupation in the last 20, 30 years of these big corporates, it has been, as I say, operational excellence. It's all about process improvement. It's all about systems. It's all about structures that essentially help us to be more efficient, more effective. But guess what? There's one thing missing here: the customer. And I have to say, I listened recently to the Global Chief Innovation Officer of one of our biggest banks. He invited me to his team meeting across the world. I sat there for 2 hours, and after the meeting, he said to me, "Roger, what did you think?" And I said, "Michael," I said, "I never heard the word customer mentioned once." So clearly we have some catching up to do here. And as I say, COVID has only exaggerated the difference between incumbents and digital leaders. So how can we actually take some steps forward and try and address this gap? How can we, particularly as incumbents in most of the countries that I'm sure are attending, how can we get closer to the value of those digital leaders? And what we've done, thanks to the sponsorship of Salesforce, is to conduct a study over the last 3 months that has talked to 20 leading US and European companies about their approach to improving customer centricity. And out of that study has come 3 very specific steps that people are now taking to bridge this gap. The 3 steps are: do less things now, then do things differently, and finally, do different things. And I'll explain very briefly what I mean by these 3 areas, and then we can go on to the panel discussion. So do less things. This is very much associated with the last 6 months, the pandemic, where a lot of organizations have had to dramatically refocus. And I think the lessons that we're learning here is prioritize, don't continue to optimize. It's all about effective execution around the customer. And just to give you two good examples, one drawn from the media industry, who have been actively harvesting online data. The take-up of streaming channels has been terrific in the last 6 months. And what this the organization, Channel 4 in the UK, has done is to really start to apply technology to harvesting all the viewer characteristics, thereby improving the targeting of program materials to their audience. The second really important step, I think, has been seen by many consumer products companies like Avon and Unilever, who have essentially pushed the go direct approach. They don't want to be intermediated by the retailer. They want to engage directly with the customer, gain direct customer insight, build up customer data so that they can actually do a better job of addressing their customer market. So that is doing less things. And the important thing there is that a lot of organizations have cut back dramatically on internal programs and projects, and instead have concentrated entirely on the customer journey and harnessing customer data. The second thing I mentioned was doing things differently. And interestingly, the slogan here is, we have to do it just in case rather than just in time. And again, in an operational efficiency world, it was all about just in time. It was all about optimizing that wonderful supply chain so that we could deliver at the last moment. But hey, what's happened? In some sectors, demand has gone up by at least a factor of 10, and in other sectors, it's gone down by at least a factor of 10. That careful optimization just doesn't work. So what are people doing in that situation, doing things differently? Well, we talked to Land Security, our largest property group in the UK. They realize that large office blocks are going to have to change in nature significantly post-COVID, and they're actually now working very closely with tenants and with developers to redefine what office space is all about. They're not trying to do it on their own. They're really trying to do it with a spirit of co-development. Another interesting case that we came up with was, how do you increase trust in your brand, particularly during COVID? And here we had Hilton Worldwide, who've just formed a partnership with the Mayo Clinic and Reckitt Benckiser to offer a clean room policy so that they can attract people back to their hotels. And last but not least, we talked to GlaxoSmithKline, one of the world's largest pharma companies. They've just formed a partnership with 23andMe to begin to address the market for personalized medicine, personalized treatment, particularly in the area of cancer. So in the do things differently, the whole collaboration and partnering has really begun to surface quite dramatically. And last but not least, doing things differently. Doing different things. As we come out of COVID, clearly the old business models, which were okay for the last decades, are no longer relevant, in a much more uncertain world, which has shifted dramatically even in the last 6 months. And we can draw some very interesting examples of companies who've really taken the view they have to become more customer-centric. They've got to redesign their whole business models, their ways of doing business, to really engage directly with the customer and therefore be able to track and respond to changes in the market. One example actually we drew from the States was Disney's Magic Band, actually launched 7 years ago, which was designed to enhance the customer experience as people visit the theme parks. This Magic Band enables people to simplify their transactions, paying for food, hotels, but more importantly, helps direct them to the rides that are most interesting, most relevant to them as individuals. It actually improved the stay in the park by 50%. That had an enormous knock-on effect on revenues. The second good example was the McDonald's kiosks that you will all see today in their restaurants. This has basically improved the interaction with the customer, firstly by offering McDonald's real-time information about who is consuming what and where across their vast network of restaurants. But more interestingly, they found that customers are actually ordering more indulgent meals than they would if they actually had to ask a human being to give them the order. So again, they've seen a rise in their profits, rise in their revenues, all pointing to a real victory in engaging the customer. So those are the three important points that I'd like to discuss with the panelists. But just to conclude, there are some very serious implications here, I think, for CIOs and board members. And the first most important one is place the customer at the center of all conversations. Don't get preoccupied by the back office, please. Don't get preoccupied by IT operations, please. It is all about the customer, and I'm sure we will be able to discuss that. I think the second really important thing from an IT point of view, we've got to reduce the legacy. Legacy today has imposed all sorts of challenges and constraints on traditional companies in the way we run our applications, the structures, the processes. All of these things need to be quite dramatically replaced. But we're not going to do that in days or weeks. This is going to be at least a decade to escape fully from the legacy that we have today. So I think the challenge, certainly for the IT organizations, is to work out how can we supplement our strengths at the core with a genuine engagement with the customer? What sort of digital capabilities do we have to wrap around the core so that we can engage more efficiently, more effectively with the customers that we serve? So I think that's really the starting point for our discussions, and I'm really very keen to hear reactions and challenges and to see where we're all heading, because we all recognize there's a big job to be done here. And I think a lot of CEOs today are looking to the IT community, they're looking to their digital leaders to help point the way forward.